Representative, your district includes Hanover, which is widely known as snack capital of the world. One of those snack companies, is Utz Potato Chips. It's a company you actually even worked at. However, there has been some rumors flying around here that are kind of disturbing. And I was wondering if you would be able to make a comment on these said rumors here.
Okay, so this is a classified envelope here. I did at one time carry a clearance when I worked for President Bush at the White House, so I guess I have the clearance to open this up. Okay, let's see here. Oh.
Do you have any comment on this?
Okay. It's me eating some Martin's chips here, which I have been known to eat on occasion. I eat all York County snack foods.
Okay.
But yes, I did work at Utz. Martin's has a good kettle cooked. Not gonna lie, they're pretty good. Representative Grove, who used to represent part of York County, he and I would go back and forth on which company had the best potato chip. He would always say Martin's. I would, represent the 169th with Utz, and so it's. I wonder if he gave this to you. Did he give this to you?
I cannot reveal my sources.
You've entered the smoke-filled room, where we cut through the haze of Harrisburg politics and get to examine the laws and lawmakers that really drive the discussion.
Well, Representative Kate Klunk, thank you so much for joining us today. As we mentioned, you represent the 169th Legislative District, which is Southwest York County. Tell me, what you call Snacktown USA, or what others call Snacktown USA, you call it home. Tell me about your home. Who are your constituents? What is your district? What are their issues?
So I represent the 169th District, which I absolutely love. I love my hometown. I love Southern York County. This is an area where my family has lived for generations. Since the early 1700s, we've called Southern York County and some of Adams County home. And so for me to be able to represent those folks who've given, me so many opportunities and be able to give back to my community, it just means so much. But we are the snack town capital of the world. We make more snack foods, I think, per square mile than any other place in the world. The 17331 zip code is home to so many snack food companies. The big ones, we've got Snyder's, we've got Utz, we have, some smaller operations like Wheatie Pretzel, or even our hand-twisted Ravona pretzels. So, which is actually Hanover spelled backwards for those listening at home.
I never picked up on that.
Yes, Ravona is Hanover spelled backwards. And actually, Ravona, there were spinning mills that were called Ravona spinning mills. So there was always a play on Hanover in different ways, whether it was through pretzels or the spinning mills.
So what are the big issues in your district?
So in my district, we have a very diverse district. We have, our commercial center with Hanover Borough and the surrounding municipalities. So that's kind of the economic driver with manufacturing, with our hospital system and healthcare. And then you go east towards Cadora State Park. So we have a wonderful state park. So a lot of outdoor recreational opportunities, farmland, so agriculture. And then you end up in the easternmost point of my district, which is the New Freedom Glen Rock area. And, those folks are a mix of traditional folks families who have lived in Southern York County for years, but also some transplants, some folks who have moved up from Maryland, from Virginia, so that they can be close to the 83 corridor to get up and back for work.
So you said about Cadora State Park, and I believe it was at that park where you told me that you can always tell who actually knows you versus people who just say that they know you by how they say your name. If they call you Kate, they don't probably really know you all that well, but if they call you Katie, they've probably known you since you were a child.
Yes.
What was it like growing up there? What was your childhood like?
So I was Katie up until maybe about middle school and then switched. But actually, when I played softball in high school, there were 3 Kates on the team. So I was actually Katie K, 3B because I played third base. So that was my
That's your call
softball.
sign.
That was my call sign for softball because you couldn't, tell the three Kates apart. But growing up in Hanover, it was awesome. Growing up in a small town, some people poo-poo it and they want to move away. But I decided to, stay and raise my family here because there's so many opportunities living in a small town. You know everyone. You, have access to all of the amenities that you need in life. But Hanover is a really great town where if you want to get away somewhere, you can in a weekend. If you want to go down to Washington, if you want to do a trip down to Philadelphia, if you want to go to New York, there's so many opportunities in such a short driving distance. You can get that small town feel, but also get the big city life if you really want it. But Hanover, growing up there, everyone knew everyone. If you got in trouble, somebody was going to find out pretty quick. I graduated with a class of 100 kids from Hanover High School, and that was really special because we were all in it together. Most of us were friends from when we were in elementary school or even preschool, going up through, or went to the same church, was involved in the same sports teams. And that type of close-knit community, I think, is what makes Hanover special. It's why a lot of families stay there. But I also think that it's why a lot of people want to move there because I think it's a warm and welcoming community. We have a lot of events, a lot of opportunities with our recreational activities with, Codora State Park. And our school system is really great, whether that's, Hanover Public School District, Southwestern, that's, in the Hanover side of my district, and Southern, Susquehannock High School was just down there a couple weeks ago. So warm and inviting and just really committed to students. And I hear a lot of folks who move up from Maryland because they hear about the quality of our schools. And they just come up here and are so impressed with the offerings and opportunities for our students. And the smaller class sizes are just really beneficial, I think, for learning for our children. And that's in part why, we've decided to send our children to Hanover Public School District. I went there. That's where my mom went. It's where, my grandfather went. And so, for me, there's just such a draw to Hanover because that's where my roots are. It's just something keeps drawing you back.
It seems like a good friend of mine recently moved to Hanover, used to live in Maryland, and you see a lot of that, Maryland transplants coming up into your district specifically. How do you think that Hanover has been able to maintain that sense of a small, close-knit community? Have things changed a lot since your childhood in terms of that? Because it seems like that's what everybody wants when they move up from Maryland. They come to Hanover and they're like, this is such a cool small town. How do you guys maintain that?
And so it is hard because of the growth, because of new people moving in. But I think, we welcome people with open arms, whether that's, new families joining some of our sports teams or joining a different board from maybe Main Street Hanover, coming to downtown events. There's really something for everyone to get involved with locally. But, there are challenges with that. With all of our organizations are volunteer organizations. So our Lions clubs, our Rotary, those types of service organizations. It is hard because we have those longstanding families that have always been supporting them. And it has been harder to get those new folks moving in fully engaged. And I think part of that is because, it's a lot of younger families. It's harder. And I know this as, a working mom of two little girls. It's hard to find that time for me and my husband to volunteer. But we do it. It's not easy, and especially if you're commuting, maybe back down to Maryland, because we have a lot of commuters. We have a lot of Baltimore Fire, police, folks who work down at McCormick, some of those businesses down in Maryland. That drive time is difficult for them to be engaged, but they also wanted to move up here because of, all of the amenities that we have. You get a little bit of a better bang for your buck when it comes to housing. and also just a general better quality of life. So,
Safety seems to be a big one.
Exactly. And we have a wonderful public safety network with our local police departments. We are truly blessed to have the police departments that we do. And also, to have those other folks in our community who have that experience, who are engaged with our local governments. Maybe they work down in Baltimore County, but they're still, active in, showing up for meetings, questioning what's going on. But we also have a great, district attorney. We used to have Dave Sunday, who's now our AG. We've got Tim Barker, who's our district attorney, and making sure that, they're working with our, AG partners and our federal partners, and, making sure that we have a good, strong drug task force, our rapid response team, making sure that, our part of York County, while we're in the West and, we're the whole way out in Hanover, that, we do have those county resources and are working as a team. And I think that's so important. That's what I hear the most about our areas. When I explain, our opportunities at our school district, what, our local governments are doing, how everyone is working together with our businesses, everyone is working hand in hand and collaborating. And when I talk to other members about what we're doing, they're like, how are you doing that? That's just so special. It just sounds like your community really has it together. And they ask, how did you do it? I'm like, well, it's the people. We wouldn't have all of this if it wasn't for the committed people in our community, at our businesses and local government, who are saying, look, we're all in this together. Let's work to make this community great. And that's why we have a wonderful community in Southern York County. It's the people.
One of the themes that I seem to hear a lot on this podcast is most members have either worked their way through college or joined the military so that they can go to college after. You are no exception to that rule. Tell me a little bit about your college experience.
So to get to college, I kind of have to go back to, I was the first babysitter. I was the neighborhood babysitter. If you needed somebody to watch your kids, I was the girl. That was my first job, babysitting. I then worked at Wise Markets as a cashier. Also worked Morning League, the Carol Granger Morning League program for Hanover Borough. Baseball and softball, it's an instructional league that still exists today. And God bless him, Mr. Granger. He was such a great mentor to high school and college students, so that we could then mentor young kids who just wanted to learn how to play baseball and softball. I learned a lot about myself, kids, how to relate to kids, how to teach them the game that I love. And so, I worked there during the summers, and then when I graduated from high school, had the opportunity to work at Utz as a packer on third shift. So that summer after high school, I worked night shift at Utz. I would leave from there, I'd get off there at 7, and I would go home and change and get on my softball shorts and T-shirts, go down and work for a couple hours in the morning at Morning League. I'd go home and sleep. Sometimes I'd mix a babysitting job in there, and then on the weekends I worked still as a cashier at Utz. So I worked 3-4 jobs, if you count some babysitting mixed in, for almost 2 summers.
Wow.
And that was all to make sure that I had money to go to college. And my dad wanted to make sure I had skin in the game. And I think that's, important for kids when you're investing that much money into your education, that you have some skin in that game, because it's not cheap. But I was able to, pull together some scholarships, some of my own money. My parents, helped a little bit, still had to take out loans, and made it work to go to Dickinson, and was truly blessed to have a scholarship to go there, because quite frankly, it probably would have been impossible for me to go there without a scholarship. But with all of my scholarships, with the academic scholarship that they offered, it was actually cheaper for me to go there than it was to go to a state school. So it was kind of a no-brainer. Okay. And, at Dickinson, I had so many opportunities. I was able to major in 3 different subject matters. So had a major in American history, and then public policy, and also economics. And my dad looked at me, because originally I wanted to do political science and history, and he's like, Kate, what are you going to do? What's your backup plan? If, because originally I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And, reading, writing, research, those two just made sense, right? He's like, what's your backup plan? If that doesn't work out, what else do you think you want to do? I was like, well, maybe I'll go into business, financial planning, investments. And he was a finance major. So he was like, why don't you look at business or economics? And so then I ended up pivoting and doing originally history and economics. And then, the York County and me, it's in our being, I think, to figure out how to squeeze the most out of every opportunity and financial investment that you can make. And so I said, I can actually do 3 majors at Dickinson for the price of 1. And so I ended up squeezing out a public policy degree too. So
tell me about like you said before, you ended up working in the Bush administration, part of their National Economic Council team, and then later in their communications team. When I'd have to assume those are probably some of the hardest jobs in that administration at the time, maybe second only to being Dick Cheney's hunting partner. But tell me about your time there and the journey that led you to that.
Sure. So, I always had a passion for serving others. I was very involved in leadership opportunities in high school, was, student council president, was involved in Key Club, volunteering, was a class officer. And so I knew I always wanted to serve my community in some way moving forward. And growing up, some people don't know this, but my grandfather on my dad's side of the family, my Papa Klunk, Fred Klunk, he was a state representative.
Oh, okay.
He served on New Oxford's council, very involved in the Democratic Party in Adams County. He was the Democratic Party chair for a number of years and ran for...
We'll bore that out. We'll section that part out.
But he was, and he served as a state representative as a Democrat. And so he would always help people. So he was a small business owner. He was orphaned at age 10. And was taken in by a woman who worked at my great-grandfather's cigar factory right outside of McSherrystown. And he had to figure it out on his own. And he did not let that deter him. Both of his parents died when he was very young. He started multiple businesses to help provide for his family, was very involved in numerous organizations throughout Adams County, and really just wanted to give back to his local community because, he was given so much, and his brothers and sisters who had to deal with, no parents, being orphans, they figured it out. Some of them had businesses. One of his brothers was an electrician, another owned a shoe store. And what he would do every year is, because he owned a pretzel factory, he hand twisted pretzels.
What was the name of it?
Old Quaker Pretzel in New Oxford. And he had ovens, so he would cook turkeys for people in the community who might not be able to have a Thanksgiving dinner. And he would also buy out his brother's shoe store at the end of the year and, get all of the extra shoes and be able to give those out to families that might need shoes.
Wow.
So he was always giving back to the community. And growing up, I would hear all of those stories. Well, your grandfather made sure that we had Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, or your grandfather made sure we had shoes, or your grandfather made sure my dad had a job and helped him get a job after he lost it because of his connections. And so, I grew up hearing that, and I just wanted to be able to have that type of an impact in my own life. So, for me, I originally wanted to be an attorney. I wanted to go into private practice and help people. That's in my being, is to help people and solve problems. And that's the business that we're in now. And so originally I wanted to go into law school, but I also loved the political side of things. As a kid growing up, I was always the one who wanted to stay up late with my parents and watch the State of the Union address, Mr. Speaker, here's the President of the United States. And I can just, see that ingrained sitting at the end of my parents' bed, watching those speeches, watching the conventions, listening to the nightly news. I always loved learning about the presidents, learning about our government. And so when I got to college, for me, it was, okay, I love the politics side. I love the helping people. Let's see if maybe government service might be for me at some point. And so I applied for the internship program for then Congressman Todd Platts and had an opportunity to serve as an intern in Washington, D.C. for half the summer and in the Gettysburg district office for Congressman Todd Platts. And there I learned so much about constituent service, how that office could help people and really navigate government, right? You know, when somebody calls our offices or, you know, your congressman's office, they're at the end of their rope. They don't know who else to call. You are their lifeline to hopefully solving a problem. And so, you know, being on the receiving end of those phone calls for, you know, issues with Social Security, with the IRS, with veterans benefits, and being able to make that difference in an individual's life, I really love that. And so, you know, I was continuing the law option and, you know, applying for law school, but also still kind of keeping my feet in the political side. And so I applied kind of on a whim because I knew some folks when I was down in D.C. with interning for Congressman Platts who interned at the White House. And I had a friend look at me and he was like, you're never going to work there unless you have a connection with Texas or, you know, you're a senator's daughter or son. And I was none of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely none of that. You know, again, my dad's whole family, they were all Democrats.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't be a Klunk living in York or Adams County and not be a Democrat. So, and here I am working.
So are you
for
a first
Republicans.
generation Republican?
Yes.
Really?
On my
Okay.
dad's side of
Gotcha.
the family.
Okay.
So and I'll never forget sitting in, it was a political science course. I can see where I sat in Denny Hall at Dickinson, and I'm sitting there, and I come to this realization that I'm not a Democrat. I'm really a Republican. I remember calling my dad saying, Dad, just so you know, I'm a Republican. And here's why.
You're coming out of the closet.
I laid it out for him, and you know the York County voter registration office. When I then registered as a Republican, they sent not one, not two, not three, but 4 cards to my parents' house that I changed registration. And so he called me. And he said, well, we got something in the mail today, and I'm having a heart attack. Well, what did you get in the mail today? Oh, no. Did I get a speeding ticket? What was it? He said, well, it was from the York County voter registration office. I was like, yep, it's official. I'm a Republican.
What was his reaction?
You know, he was okay with it because, you know, I looked at him and I said, Dad, everything that you have taught me in my life and the values that you have instilled in me, I really, truly believe that I'm more in line with the Republican Party. And the interesting thing about it is looking through all of my grandfather's campaign materials from the 1970s, and he was a state rep from 70 to 72. He lost in the Nixon landslide, okay? And if I look at his campaign materials, it's everything that I talk about in my district every single day. It goes back to, you know, bills that I've sponsored, being, you know, pro-family, pro-small business, pro-agriculture, manufacturing, all of those things that make up our district. And so, you know, for me, becoming a Republican, it just made sense because it was the way I was raised, it was the values that I was instilled, and it was the community that raised me, right? And being in that type of a community that, you know, really valued family, that really valued the business community, that valued, you know, limited government and, you know, keeping taxes low and trying to be resourceful and frugal. I mean, that's the York County way, right? You know, we're coupon clippers. We liked the deal.
Do what you can with what you have.
Yes. Yeah. And so, you know, so for me, that was, that just made sense. And so I applied on a whim for Washington, D.C. program. Dickinson did a study abroad semester in Washington, D.C., and so it cost me the same amount to go do an internship in D.C., which was really great to be able to see if this is the option that I want to do. See if DC is calling me or if it's the law. And so I applied on a whim to the White House. What do I have to lose, right? And they called. And so the intern coordinator at the time, who's become a very dear friend of mine, Mike Sanders, he was director of the interns, and what he told me that stood out on my resume, not the fact that I was a triple major in economics and, was super involved in my college experience and, had the internship with Congressman Platts. It was the potato chip packing.
Really?
Yes, it was. That just stood out to him. And he was from Oklahoma. He had never had any of their chips before coming to Washington, D.C., and he loved grandmas. The grandmas were his favorites. And so, he sets up an interview just to clear me first before he sends out the resumes to the individual offices. And the first question that he asked me is about my time packing potato chips. And he said, he got resumes from people from all across the country. And he said, what stood out, and I tell this to kids, is you worked your tail off to put yourself through college. We could see that you had multiple jobs at the same time. And it takes a special person to say, I'm going to sign up, work third shift, packing potato chips to put yourself through college. And I learned so much about myself, so much about business, so much about, the wonderful workforce that we have in our community from that job. There's a lot of hard work that goes into making a potato chip. And so for him, he knew that I was going to show up on time. I was going to, nose to the grindstone, work my tail off for the president. And I ended up getting an interview with the National Economic Council. Made sense because of my economics degree, and ended up working for the National Economic Council. They brought me on as an intern, and here I am. I'll never forget. It was a full circle moment. I took the metro to my first day, get off at Farragut West Orange Line, and I get off the metro, and I make the left to go down the street, down 18th Street. And on the corner is this little hot dog stand. And the guy's selling hot dogs in the morning. Why? I don't know, but he was selling hot dogs. And on the end of his display were Utz potato chips. Had it not been for those little mini bags that I packed on line 4, I don't know if I would have been there.
Yeah.
And so that was such a cool full circle moment. Here I am. Kate Klunk, family were Democrats, Republican, standing there, seeing the bags of chips that I packed, the previous summer on that little hot dog stand, walking down to the White House. It was amazing for a girl, small town America, to have that opportunity, to then have a front row seat to history. It was awesome.
Tell me about the emotions walking into the White House for the first time on your first day.
Oh my gosh.
Was it surreal?
It wasn't actually the first time I had been to the, most of the offices are there in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, which is right beside the White House. And I had actually been there before as part of a bus trip with the Democratic Party. This was during the Clinton administration. Gotcha. My dad, as part of a bus trip, this was clearly pre-9/11, they would bring volunteers down to work in the correspondence office. And so we were there, and we were opening up mail. And I was there opening up kids' mail with him as a volunteer. I was in middle school at the time. I think I was in 5th grade. And we were just opening up mail. And in walks Socks, the cat, the Clinton's cat. Okay. And I got to play with Socks. And we saw, President Clinton, he was coming into the EEOB to honor some sort of sports team, and I saw him from, down the hallway. And then so here I am walking in as an intern, with the badge and everything. It was absolutely surreal. And then that first weekend, our intern coordinator in the office, Sue Gertelman, she took us to a Marine One landing.
Wow.
And so here we are, we're there for a week, we're answering the phones, making the coffee, making the copies, doing some basic research. They do that to test you to make sure you're okay before they give you anything big. Can you answer the phone? Can you, make sure that the coffee is okay? Like, get the basics down.
Are you a competent person?
Right,
yeah.
right. And then, they'll give you more. And so she took us out. And I'll never forget that experience, seeing Marine One land and the president come off. And then sometimes he decides to shake hands, or sometimes he just walks straight into the building. And he came around and shook hands. And it was just such a surreal moment. There I was shaking hands with President Bush, girl from little Hanover, Pennsylvania, intern on the South Lawn, having this once-of-a-lifetime opportunity experience. And so, I got a chance to work on a ton of different issues. I was there. They had just done some major work on some Medicare reforms and, looking at different tax policy. So performed some research for 3 special assistants to the president when I was there as an intern. And then I was planning on going to law school. I was like, okay, maybe someday, maybe I'll serve on borough council, school board, move back to Hanover, work as a private practice attorney. And then I had applied to law school. That was the route. And then I get a call. And it was April. It was like this time of year back in, 2004 when I'm graduating from college. And, the check's already been written for law school. And, the deposit's already been sent in.
Yeah.
And get a call from Sue Gertelman, who was my intern coordinator, and she said, Kate, I'm taking a different position, so there's going to be movement within the office. We're going to have, an entry-level staff assistant opening. We would like you to take the job, not even interview for the job. We want you for the job. Okay, stop me in my tracks. The White House is calling me to tell me that they want me to come back and work full-time. And so I took a job. I said, you know what, there's always time for law school. I can always go back, but there's only one opportunity to work at the White House for the President of the United States. And so I took a job, complete change of plans, got an apartment. One of my friends who had interned was also moving back to DC. We found an apartment together. And I moved into my apartment the day after I graduated from college in May. And so within a month, everything changed. All of my plans changed. I was down in DC and working for the President of the United States. And not knowing, this was 2004, it was a re-election campaign, not knowing if I was going to have a job in 6 months, because the president could have lost that election. And so, I nose to the grindstone and, got the job done and worked there. President won, so continued the job, which was a blessing. And, we would have figured it out if he would have lost, but continued working there until the fall of 2007 when I went back to law school. But during my time at the White House, it was absolutely amazing. You watch The West Wing. I was a big, fan of The West Wing, and they cram so much drama into a 1-hour episode. And it's very Hollywood sensationalized, but there's still a lot of truth to what you see on TV. I would always say, well, I worked for this character. I wasn't necessarily this character, but I was like that character working for this character, and it doesn't look anything like that. And this is what it looks like, because when people would come on West Wing tours, that I could, take people on West Wing tours. That was the really cool thing, was being able to share this with everyone else.
And this was while that show was on air, wasn't it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it was still on. And so I would always say that I kind of worked for Toby, sort of, kind of, and Josh Lyman, and I was Donna. I was kind of the Donna, but Donna is a little bit ditzy on the show, a little bit. Well, we're blondes, but I'm not that ditzy. But Donna does, I won't give too much away. She works her way up within the White House then eventually in later seasons. So they recognize her talent.
The show hasn't been on for 15 years. If you're spoiling it now,
yes, okay, fair,
it's not your fault.
Fair. But it was just really cool to see that. And when I would bring people in, they're like, this is really tiny. And so the West Wing's very small. I had a chance, so I worked in the EEOB as an intern, worked there originally, and then worked for 3 special assistants to the president, and then was promoted within the first year of being there and brought over to the West Wing to work for our deputy director of the National Economic Council, Keith Hennessy, and worked with him for a number of months before then going back to work with one of my former special assistants to the president for economic policy, Kathy Martin, who got promoted up to be deputy communications director for policy. And so I shifted over with her, and that office focused more on getting the president's message out on domestic policy issues. So it wasn't just economic policy, it was all domestic policy issues. So economic policy, but also education, healthcare, housing, the whole gamut fell under our roof. And so we would then coordinate with all of the agencies whenever there was a policy rollout or coordination on any major event, and making sure that the White House was in direct communication with whether that was the Department of Labor or the Department of Commerce, Homeland Security, whatever it might be, making sure that we were all on the same page and creating that echo chamber for the president's message to make sure that we were coordinating, having talking points and, myth fact sheets, all of those actual documents that we would send out to make sure that they had the proper materials. Because this was all before social media. So Facebook, when I was at the White House, I remember getting my Facebook account, and I had to have my Dickinson College, email address to be able to sign up for Facebook. So that kind of dates me for everyone. But we didn't have social media for President Bush. It was much more traditional radio, TV, newspapers. There was some, video. There was the internet department that handled the website and Barney Cam. We were starting to do videos and fun things from the communication side, but it was very traditional and nothing like it is today. President Bush never tweeted a thing.
Yeah, probably for the best. Yeah,
those tweets would have been probably really interesting if he did tweet. Some of his Bushisms, as they say, would have been really funny on Twitter. But
I remember there being I don't know if it was a documentary that was shot, but I see clips on social media all the time of, it looks like almost a document, like somebody just having a camcorder on Air Force One, getting just candid moments with him, where I can't tell you any examples, but I always found them very funny, and it's very endearing as well, because everybody thought of him as being an idiot. Because he had an accent, I guess. I don't know. But it was nothing like that.
Oh, absolutely not. So working for a deputy in the policy shop and even in the communications shop, the Domestic Policy Council and the National Economic Council, at least under the Bush administration, that's where the policies were developed and vetted in conjunction with the different departments. And so when a particular policy that the president wanted to advocate for was being developed, it would go through, the special assistants, the staffers to do the research, and then it would be vetted on up the chain. And so the first real meeting would be a deputies meeting that we would help coordinate across the entire administration. So if it was, for example, a workforce development policy, we would bring in the Department of Commerce, the Department of Labor, maybe Department of Education if there was an education component, and all of those deputy secretaries would come in and they would have a meeting, vet the policy, go over the PowerPoint as part of the process to then bring it up to, the assistant to the president level for a policy time with the president. And so it would always work its way up, and then we would help plan the policy time with the president. And you better be prepared, to go into that meeting. And that's why, you'd vet it at the deputy level and try to anticipate, well, what is the president going to ask?
Yeah.
Where are our holes in this? where can we make this better, fine tune this particular policy so that when they were ready to go in for policy time with the president to determine a course of action on a particular policy issue, that they had all of the information ready to go so he could make an informed decision. And so those meetings were very high profile. It was where all the cabinet secretaries would come in and they would have a meeting and hash out what the president was going to do on a particular policy area. So that's where it was really cool being able to help, all the research that I did was funneled up to the president. I wasn't in the meeting in the Oval Office, but all of the prep work, there's so many people behind that particular decision that a president makes.
So take me briefly through the journey then that led you to running for office.
So running for office, again, I always had an idea that I wanted to serve. From hearing the stories about my grandfather and, my parents were very active. My mom was on PTO. My dad served in the Hanover area JCs, just, active in the local community. And so I wanted to go to law school and I made the decision in 2007, it was, they looked at all of the staff and said, hey, we're heading into the last year of the presidency. Mm-hmm. We need you to commit to staying on or move on. Now's the time. If you want to make a move, this is the time where you make a move. And so in talking with my then boss, Kathy Martin, she was an attorney, and she said, Kate, I know you really want to do this, and you want to be back home. That's where you want to be. So, now would be a time for you to go back to school. So applied, went back to law school. And, after law school, came back to Hanover, was working as a private practice attorney, just, minding my own business, serving my clients, and heard about the redistricting efforts that were taking place. And so that was, for maps, it was in 2010, for maps for 2012. And I'm looking at the maps and, well, there's a brand new seat through redistricting because we gained so much population in York County that they were moving a brand new seat, the 169th, moving it from Philadelphia to York County. And it was right smack dab in the community in which I grew up. And I had a number of people come to me and say, why don't you run? You have great experience. You've worked for a member of Congress. You have worked at the White House. You have a great public policy background. You're involved in the community, with Main Street Hanover and trying to revitalize downtown. You're committed to this community. You have experience with your clients, with the law practice, and why don't you run? And so I ran. So I ran. And I said, what do I have to lose, right? I was, 30 years old, and, I had a whole lifetime ahead of me. If I lose, I lose, right? I'm still a lawyer. And, you can never take that away. You can take that away, but you can take that away. But actually, you lose it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what my dad would always say. He never fired anyone. People fired themselves. Yeah. So, you kind of fire yourself as a lawyer if you lose your license. But, running in that primary is a 4-way primary. I was the only woman, the first woman to represent Southern York County. Then Senator Kristen Phillips Hill, she was then Representative Kristen Phillips Hill. We came in together. So we were the second and third women to represent York County. Southern York County had never been represented by women before. She's, became a very dear friend of mine. We shared an office space over in the East Wing. We were two partners in, policy crime up here, trying to get things done together. We were the, 1-2 York County Punch. I'll never forget the first meeting that we had with Speaker Turzai. The York County delegation meeting right after we had gotten elected, and we were sitting in a diner and just talking about, he wanted to know what was important for our districts and getting to know us as new members. And I was on one side, she was on the other, and we were hammering him on a point, and he just kept on backing up towards the wall, and we just kept on closing in on him. And, then Representative Stan Saylor and Seth Grove and Keith Gillespie were also at the table, and they were like, well, this is going to be fun. little different mix
Yeah.
to the York County delegation. But, having somebody like that, with me to go, into this it was great to have another woman, to bounce ideas off of. And I owe so much to her. She's become a very dear friend. She actually set up me and my husband. So
Really?
she's
Okay.
a little matchmaker. She set up a couple different couples. But I ran for this position in 2012, and then the maps were deemed unconstitutional. So we hit pause, ran again in 2014. That's when I actually won. And it's 2014, and I'm lamenting to her. I'm like, I knocked on thousands of doors, and I have yet to meet anyone who could be a remotely close, future husband material. And she said, I think I've got somebody for you. And so she introduced me to my husband, and, second date, I knew I was going to marry him. And, here we are today.
Where'd you guys go for your second date?
So first date, we went to Warehouse Gourmet.
Okay.
Second date, we went to, it was then the Staub's Landing, and now it's Davino's.
Oh, no way. Oh, I
yeah.
love Davino's.
Yeah. So that was it. That's where I knew I was going to marry him. He, he had so much love for his grandmother who had just passed. And I was talking about my grandmother, and I just said, if this man loves his grandmother this much and these stories that he's telling me, he has to be an amazing human being and somebody who I want to marry and, raise kids with. And so
Was he?
he's
Yes.
amazing.
Okay, good.
And it all goes back to actually cherry chapstick. He brought out his cherry chapstick and put his cherry chapstick on, and I said, well, that reminds me of my mama. Because my mama always carried cherry chapstick. So we like to say that our grandmothers, Kristen did some good work in setting us up, but then our grandmothers really, truly brought us together.
So let's take a little bit of a 180 here and talk about policy. You are pretty much well known as being the mom of Harrisburg. I think you kind of have that reputation. You seem to always have a beat on what mothers in the Commonwealth are facing. And you, because of that, probably you're now the chairwoman of the Children and Youth Committee. And one of the big issues that the Commonwealth is facing right now is the expense of childcare. And with our population aging, and you can't run as much as we love our seniors, you can't run a Commonwealth on retirees. And younger people aren't having kids because of this issue. Why is childcare so expensive?
So my daughter calls me the chair of the kids committee.
Okay.
So Grace calls me the chair of the kids committee. She'll say, how's the kids committee going, Mom? And so I'm a mother of two little girls. So my oldest, Grace, is 8, and my youngest, Claire, just turned 5. And so she's going to be heading to kindergarten here in the fall. But I've raised 2 daughters. As a state legislator, I see it firsthand. I have my mom friends. I'm on all the moms pages on Facebook. I have a pulse on what's going on with our working moms and just stay-at-home moms here in our local community in the Commonwealth. And if we want to grow Pennsylvania, we need to be more family-friendly. And one of those areas is in the childcare space, because childcare, it's an economic driver, because if parents don't have a place to send their children so that they can go to work, we're going to have people who are staying at home, right? We're going to have businesses that don't have workers. And so it is truly a workforce development issue. We hear it from businesses. We hear it from the chamber. We just heard it the other day at a child care hearing that we had done in my district from the Hanover Area Chamber of Commerce, from Oats Quality Foods, one of the biggest employers in my district. And it is an economic workforce development issue, because if they can't get employees, they've got no one to pack the chips. They've got no one to make the widget. They've got no one to, work at the hospital, wherever it is. And we also need to work to make sure that that's affordable, right? So that an individual is not making that decision of, well, it's just easier for me to stay at home. It's easier for me to just take 5, 6, 7 years off of a career. And most of the time that falls to the woman. In our marriage, my husband and I, we kind of triage, and he's very great with helping and trying to coordinate schedules and everything. But for the most part, the majority of the time, it falls on me to coordinate all of that. And so it's an issue that we need to solve, because women in Pennsylvania and families in Pennsylvania need to have options for their children that fit their individual family needs. And every single family is different. For me and my husband, we have family who take care of our kids because, quite frankly, my schedule as a state representative is just all over the place. Some days I have to be up here at 7 o'clock in the morning for meetings, and I'm also here until 11 o'clock at night. And daycare isn't open those hours. So, for us, that's just not an option. I need to have family and friends and a village, truly, to help take care of my kids, because if my husband's traveling, maybe they need to spend the night at Nana's. Maybe they need to spend the night at my sister's house because I can't get them to school in the morning. It's, it's quite an exercise some days to plan our schedule. And that's the case for a lot of different families. And in some families, they want, the in-home provider. They want the church preschool because they want that faith-based component for their kids. Some families prefer a location that has, 4 stars with the Keystone Stars, because that particular location has people with master's degree in early childhood education, and they have a very, specialized curriculum. Some people just need something part-time. Some people, need more of those stay-at-home moms, a space to drop off their kid just for an hour or two here or there. And the thing is, for those moms, way back in the day when I was a kid, those options existed for those stay-at-home moms like my mom to be able to send me, like my mom did, to the Hanover YWCA to stay and play for hey, dropping her off, I got to go to a doctor's appointment, I got to run some errands, or I just need a break for an hour because it's been a really rough week and I just need some mom time, maybe to go get my hair done. My mom had that opportunity. And now the system doesn't allow for that because of all of the regulations, because of all of the red tape, because of the cost, to operate those stay and play options for like our stay-at-home moms don't exist. And so coming into this position as the Children and Youth Chair, when I first came in, I did a lot of listening. God gives you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? You're supposed to listen more than you talk. And so I did a lot of listening. I know my experience as a mom and what I'm hearing, but, I've gone out to hear what's happening in my community from a variety of different providers in the child care front, different providers, in foster care and adoption, and, all of the different areas that children and youth encompasses. But really honing in the past year on this child care issue has been really rewarding for me because I do see this as, it's an economic workforce issue, but it's also an issue for our kids to make sure that they are getting a quality, loving environment, that we have 5 years to get our kids prepared before they go out into the world and go to school. And it goes in an eye blink. And during that time, you want to make sure that your kids, if they are not in your care, that they are with somebody who you trust, they are in a safe, loving, warm, nurturing, educational environment. And the state must regulate in that space, but sometimes, from what I'm hearing from both providers and parents, is that we're stifling their ability to thrive and grow as kids. Because of the overregulation and because parents just don't have options. And they don't have options because they aren't affordable, because our child care providers have all of this additional red tape, all of this additional compliance that costs money, whether that's through regulatory compliance, whether that's through rising liability insurance rates, whatever it is, that added extra compliance cost to the bottom line of a child care provider means that maybe they don't have as many offerings. It means that, maybe their costs go up. Maybe they can't pay their workers as much. And that really goes back to the need to have a diverse opportunity and diverse options for parents. And so all of this goes back to my first conversation with Jody Schaefer, who was head of the Hanover YWCA. And I called her up and I said, Jody, do you have time to talk at some point about childcare? I just need to get my head around all of these regulations. What are your challenges? What are you facing? I said, what's your number one issue that you're worried about right now? And she said, van drivers. I was like, van drivers? Why van drivers? And she said, well, we have an after-school care program where we transport children from the local elementary schools to the Hanover YWCA, and I can't find van drivers. I'm like, well, why can't you find van drivers? I know we have problems sometimes with school bus drivers, but why specifically your van drivers? And she said, well, Kate, it's even harder to find a van driver because you have to have a certain number of hours of experience working with children to be able to drive that van to and from the school to the YWCA. It's easier for folks to become a school bus driver, now you have to get the CDL license, than really truly it is to drive the van for the after-school care program, because of the 2,500 hours that you need to be able to drive that van. And so I looked at Jody and I said, so Jody, if I wanted to help you, they're literally out my back door at my district office. If you were in a pinch, could you call me and can I come over and drive the van for you guys as a volunteer to help you guys out? And she said, no, Kate, because unless you were able to show that you have 2,500 hours of direct contact in helping children, you can't do it. And so we wonder why we can't find people to work in this space. It's really hard for somebody starting out as a young person to enter the space as an employee and to keep people, right? So that was my first entry into the world of regulation into this space. And you just think about it, those very same kids, what's the difference between transporting those kids on a school bus from the school to their home versus school to the after-school provider?
Well, a school bus driver probably has about 3 times as many kids on the bus to begin with.
Correct. And there's no, requirement to have experience in managing all of those kids and dealing with children and having experience in that.
A van has seatbelts.
There's
probably a lot safer.
So there's so many things there. And so that just opened up this world of regulation. And I looked at our executive director and I said, can you please print out all of the regulations related to childcare? And I've got a binder that's this thick of all of the regulations. And so you start to talk with all of these providers, and it makes sense why some of them are closing, why some of them don't want to have certain offerings because of all of the regulatory compliance. And you wonder why people are leaving the profession. It's also because the regulations are holding people back, because our regulations here in Pennsylvania are some of the most stringent to be able to enter into the profession. So you have to have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees to be able to hold certain levels, to be teachers, to run a daycare. And once you're there for decades, you could be an employee and serve children and watch them every day as an aide in, say, a 2-year-old classroom at a daycare provider. You have 25 years of experience. You don't have a bachelor's degree. There is no opportunity for you to be able to become a teacher in that classroom that you've been in for 25 years. You have that experience, but an individual who just came out of college with a bachelor's degree in early childhood can step in and be a teacher. So there's no upward mobility. There's no option for people to grow within the industry, to climb up the ladder, unless you go back to school. And let's just face it, most of our providers are women. They're women who are taking this position because maybe they're getting an option for reduced childcare, for themselves. So it's financially feasible for them to take this position because they're getting paid and they're also getting a reduced rate to send their kid there for childcare. Or, maybe it's flexible because their kids are in school, flexible hours. And so a lot of these folks are women, and we're not giving them the opportunity to continue in a career path. And it's such a worthy profession, and it's such a calling to be able to take care of another person, right? To be that motherly figure, or even, there are men in this profession, that fatherly figure that kids need. If they're not with their parents, you want to make sure that that person is loving and kind and caring and, knows how to take care of them. I actually had another member send me some information. One of their constituents reached out. They're doing a college paper on childcare and interviewed some parents and just about their thoughts on childcare. And he passed it on to me because he thought I'd be interested in some of what she had found. And one of the quotes that stuck out to me was from a parent who said, essentially, quite frankly, I don't care if you have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. I just care that you love my kid. And all of these extra requirements for degrees is what's driving up the cost.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. And that's what we're seeing. So the Archbridge Institute did a study a couple months ago that was released that showed that Pennsylvania, our regulation environment for what we require education-wise for our individuals who work in childcare is 48th out of 50.
Wow.
And that 48th means it's the worst. It means it's the second to most regulated for education because we don't allow for alternative opportunities. And one of the providers looked at me and they said, Kate, one thing that you could change is if we have these individuals, these staffers who've been here for 10, 15, 20 years, giving them an opportunity to move up from just an aide in the classroom to becoming a teacher in that classroom. We would love a path for upward mobility that doesn't require them to go back and get a degree because the provider can't pay for it and the individual staffer can't pay for it. Let's just be honest. And parents, they're recognizing that you don't necessarily need a bachelor's degree to do the job. Sometimes the on-the-job training is enough.
Or you need a KDK 3B.
Right? And that's where I think about that. I'm a mom of 2 girls. I help coach softball. I've, I babysat as a high school student and college student. I've, worked in instructional baseball and softball, help with vacation Bible school. But I probably couldn't qualify because I don't have the right degree. And I would have to gobble together how many letters of recommendation confirming how many hours of experience that I have. And so people wonder, why don't we have people applying for these jobs? Well, we're kind of making it impossible. And so, when I hear from a provider that says, give me an opportunity to give these people upward mobility, that's when I said, look, we need to take a deep dive into this between the vans, the lack of upward mobility, hearing this study saying that, we're really restrictive in Pennsylvania. And if we could just take a look at those regs and figure out still how to keep our children safe in a care setting, but also ensure that we have the workers to be able to fill those jobs and provide the care that we need so that our workforce has those opportunities locally and at a cost that's affordable, we have to be looking at that. So that's where our policy committee has been going across the state to really look at what's driving our childcare costs, what regulations aren't working for our providers, and big providers to little providers. We've heard from the YMCAs and the YWCAs, those big providers in our state, but we've also heard from the nonprofit providers. We've heard from the private for-profit providers. We've heard from the in-home providers, and that's an area where we're seeing such a contraction. And the threat of these new regulations that are potentially coming from the department, they were teased out a couple of years ago, and the folks who have operated in that in-home childcare space said, you're going to put us out of business. These regulations will absolutely put us out of business. We won't be able to stay open because we're going to have to hire more staff. It's going to be more costly. And for what? For what reason? And they asked those questions, and it's been a number of years, and so some of individuals have decided to pull out. They are no longer serving in an in-home setting, and that's coming back to options for families, some people want that in-home setting for maybe a preschool or a daycare option. And so all of those options need to be on the table, and especially in our rural communities where there isn't a YMCA or there isn't a YWCA or a UGRO or, one of the big operators. It is, Sweet Debbie down the street who has her in-home daycare. And if we don't have the Debbies and the Susies and the Brendas, the Stephanies, all throughout our community watching our kids, what are we going to have?
Well, Representative, there's a lot of work to be done.
There's so much to be done.
And there are
I could
so
talk
many
for
other
hours.
things that I wish we could cover, but unfortunately, I know we've been running here for a while, but I just want to thank you for coming on. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope to have you on again, as there's a lot more to talk about with this issue.
Well, thank you. And if you can't tell, childcare is a passion of mine. I can't wait. We're putting together a package of bills that we're going to be rolling out here very soon, and they've all come from ideas that we've heard from our providers and our parents. And, we're ready to get to work to make childcare more affordable and more accessible here in Pennsylvania for our Pennsylvania families, because they deserve it and our kids deserve it.
Representative, thank you very much.
Thank you.